Welcome back to Geek Shuffle. This is a new series of videos on the channel. Up until this point on Fridays, we had Flashback Friday. I am not running out of flashback videos, but I want to mix in some different videos on Fridays. This grading video, ranking videos, might be one of them going forward. There might be other types of videos on Fridays, depending on what I can come up with. And in this first video, we are ranking movie trilogies. This, just to make it completely clear, this is according to my personal preferences. I am a geek, hence the name of the channel. And this will be clear once we work our way through the list. The list will be 10 movies. I will start at number 12 because I want to show which movies have been pushed down because of new additions recently. And I will also mention a couple of movies. For each movie I mention on the list, I will mention a couple that didn't make the cut but were close, some that weren't close but are in the same category, and some honorable mention towards the end that aren't geek movies but might be on your list just because they are good trilogies but wouldn't fit just because they don't fit the geek category. And with that out of the way, let's just get started with number 12. Number 12 on the list is I couldn't find my DVD of them. I gave away 200 DVDs to charity just last month, and a bunch to my nephew. DVDs isn't in high demand around here anymore. I watch most things digitally, so I found another prop, and as you can see, it is Spider-Man. At number 12, it is the old Spider-Man trilogy, the Sam Raimi trilogy. And originally, it would have been number 12 on the list. The reason for it being this low on the list is the third entry in the trilogy, which pulls it down a notch. This will be a recurring theme on the list, and more on that later. Otherwise, the other movies, number 1 is a good start, and number 2 elevates it. Number 3 pulls it down. That would be number 12 on the list. I'm not gonna dwell, go into details on every number. That would make the list way too long. But number 12. With number 12 out of the way, we're moving on to what almost could have made the list but didn't. And the first almost is the X-Men trilogy. X-Men 1 came out in 2000, and some say it started the superhero wave. It was a solid first movie. And number 2, again, elevated, some would say elevated the trilogy. And then it took a sharp dive on number 3, The Last Stand, which makes sure that it won't make the cut to a top 10 list. But the 2 first movies are pretty solid. And that is why it almost would make a cut. While we are talking about number 12 on the list and Sam Raimi, there is another almost, and that is the Evil Dead trilogy, which is tonally inconsistent, some would say. Um, number 1 and number 2 are a bit too similar, and then number 3 takes a left turn in tone. I like all 3 movies, and I would still put them in a top 20 list because they had a big effect on my movie taste overall, but they are not good enough to be in a top 10 list. I still like them a lot, and I think a lot of geeks like them a lot, and they like Sam Raimi because he made these movies. But almost, almost top 10, but not entirely top 10. Very good movies though. Number 11. And I don't have a prop for this. I definitely don't have the discs because we have moved to the point where I stopped buying discs of things. Planet of the Apes. I should have the graphics up. We started with a new introduction to the franchise, different from the old movies, fresh introduction, and then moved on through the movies into familiar territories with the two uh, the two other Planet of the Apes movies. Overall, very consistent movies, and the only reason they are not higher on my list is they are not in my personal taste. I would agree that they are consistent and they are very high quality, just not my personal taste. And that brings us to almost, which might be the first very controversial, maybe, and that is this set: Alien, Aliens, and Alien 3. For some, this might be high on the list, and for some, the third pulls it way down. The first 2 movies are classics, without a doubt. They're tonally very different. Um, Ridley Scott, James Cameron, and David Fincher. For me, this was one of the harder decisions. They are in top 15 for me. I like David Fincher's movie, even though it is slightly worse than a lot of people don't like the beginning of the movie because it resets what happened in the others and so forth. I have a personal connection to the third movie. I got my first girlfriend during the third movie, so it is nostalgic for me on a different level. But as I said, it's still very good, and I would maybe put it at 13, 14 overall, almost top 10. Very good movies. I like him, and that as long as you don't move on to this set, and we're not even going to talk about it. Number 10. We have officially entered the top 10 list, and we get to the first trilogy that has moved number 11 and 12 out of the way, and that is Guardians of the Galaxy. Once again, I don't own any discs of these. We have moved past Blu-ray and up into the digital age. So I had to find some props from something else that has moved out of fashion. Guardians of the Galaxy just finished their trilogy, and there are a couple. Well, there are 6-ish Marvel trilogies, and Guardians is somewhat tonally inconsistent, but I still believe it is good enough to be in the top 10 for me as a comic book geek. Um, and it is, spoiler, it is not the last Marvel on this list, uh, because Guardians is not my favorite of the Marvel franchises. It is other people's favorite, and other people might place them higher. And I fully understand that. Again, personal taste and all. So again, if it is your favorite Marvel franchise, comment below and we can talk about it. I fully understand it. I have friends who prefer Guardians above every other franchise in Marvel. So I have had that talk, and we are still friends. So that would be number 10. And following number 10, we have the almost paired with number 10, and that is Austin Powers. And I picked Austin Powers because it is a comedy with sci-fi elements. And I wanted to have a comedy in this list. And the reason why it's almost because most people would agree that the third movie isn't as good as the first two movies. This is also a series that has personal connections to me. I liked the humor in these. I think this particular movie came out in, I don't know if the third movie came out in '99, same as the Star Wars prequels. And I was visiting America when I watched this in the cinema instead of the Star Wars prequel. Yeah, weird stories, but it had personal connections again, and the third movie pulled it down again. The third movie, almost not top 10 and not top 20, top 30 maybe. Number 9. Again, the placement of this might be controversial to some. Toy Story, the trilogy. I know we have 4 films. Looking at the first 3, the first 2 are the best. Again, the third is slightly weaker. It seems like a slight retelling of the second movie. And then the fourth, for some, elevates it a bit again, but that is not what we are looking on at this point. The reason for it being on number 9 for me is the third movie. They are very, very solid movies and very important in animation. They are on my top 10 list for their importance more than how much I like the movies, actually. And that is not the last time I will mention that point going forward. I still like them. The first one hasn't aged all that well, which is the problem with 3D animation, over stylized hand-drawn animation. But still, number 9, nothing to sniff at. Still solid movies. Many Pixar movies are very solid. I'm very big fan of Pixar. That would be number 9. Moving on to the almosts. I don't have something for the first almost, and that is there's a reason for that, and I am actually not sure if Toy Story I have to move that back. If it should replace Toy Story on my number 9 spot, and that is Train Your Dragon. Image should be up here. Train Your Dragon might be more consistent and have a better overall story arc than Toy Story 1 to 3 has at this point. So I'm still debating my number 9 spot between Toy Story 1 to 3 or Train Your Dragon 1 to 3. It's not that important, I know, but you have no idea how long I spent moving things up and down on this list. Toy Story or Train Your Dragon. It's a close call between the two. So now we can move on to the almost position. And the almost position goes to Shrek 1, 2, 3. And here again, the third. Shrek the third. Pulls it down a bit. Shrek as a character is awesome. The group of characters is awesome. Shrek 1 and 2 is great. We are not going to talk about 4. But the third pulls it down enough to not be in a top 10 list. Number 8. This guy, Captain America, and his trilogy of movies. Captain America, The First Avenger, Captain America, Winter Soldier, and Captain America, Civil War. I wanted to limit myself to one of the main 3 dudes in the Avengers. And I only think one of them deserved it, actually. And his trilogy is solid enough to be on my list. The first movie sets him up. It is the weakest of the bunch, I would think. The second movie, Civil War, is an awesome spy thriller. And Civil War is the big action piece, the mini Avenger movie that culminates it all. It is a pretty cool little trilogy for Captain America. And that brings us into his 2 friends. The first being Iron Man, which starts out really great. A lot of people really, really like the first Iron Man movie. And then we get the second movie, which isn't as good. And then we get the third movie, which is a step up from the second movie, but still not that great compared to the first one. So it's not a great trilogy. He has a trilogy. It's not as great as Captain America's trilogy. And the last almost is Thor. We got the first Thor movie was a charming introduction to Thor. It was a Hamlet-ish production. And the tonal inconsistency is the biggest issue. It's one of the biggest issues with Thor. The second movie was, for many people, the worst. The Dark World with elves. I thought it was okay. And then we got Ragnarok, which was great. We got Taika Waititi, and we got a great movie. So the first and the last are okay, tonally very inconsistent, and not enough to make a great trilogy, sadly. So we got 2 almost and 1 good enough to make my top 10 list as a comic book geek. So that was spot number 8. Number 7 brings us to maybe the hardest choice to make for a comic book nerd, geek, and that is where to put this guy. These guys. It is now called the Dark Knight Trilogy because The Dark Knight is definitely the best movie in the trilogy. And as you can see, I don't own the third one. And there's a reason why I don't own the third one. Because in my personal taste, it is the least of the three. It is not a bad movie. But it is the reason why it is number 7 on the list. When many people have the Dark Knight trilogy in a top 3. And I spent a long time debating where to put the Dark Knight trilogy. I still like it a lot. And I can still debate where to put it. I really like the begins, and I love The Dark Knight. It is almost a perfect superhero movie, and many people would agree. Dark Knight Rises has issues, in my personal opinion. But the trilogy is still great, and that is why it is number 7 on my list. That brings us to almost connected to number 7. We have another dark and brooding hero, Blade. And if X-Men started the superhero wave, this guy did it 2 years earlier. He came out in 1998. And I think many geeks remember seeing the bloodbath slaughter scene for the first time and had their minds blown. Some people didn't know it was a Marvel property at the time. Some people did. But he was one of the first superheroes to arrive at on this scene. Blade 1 and 2 are solid movies. Again, tone consistency is an issue. And Blade 3 isn't as good. The third. We have the third problem. So almost a good trilogy. Number 6. This guy again, but this time it is the new Sony Marvel trilogy. Not all will probably agree. Some like the older Spider-Man better. Some will complain that I placed this guy above Batman. I personally think this had better consistency. It fit into the Marvel MCU pretty well. And I liked the stories they tried to tell with an actor that fit the role very well. I had no issues with Tobey Maguire, but he did look like he was 30 years old when he played Spider-Man. And they had good villains, good actors for the villains. Everything seemed to come together in a good package. And that is the reason why Spider-Man, the new Spider-Man trilogy, is in number 6. The only issue I have is they slightly overdial the nostalgic factor on the third movie. It isn't too much to my liking, too much nostalgic. But it's fine. I understand that many people like it, so we have to live with it. So that was number 6. And to go with number 6, we have the almost, and that is the Wolverine trilogy. And I didn't have a better prop than this. The only link between the two is the Spider-Man on the cover. And this is where many trilogies fail on the third. This failed on the first and built itself up to win on the third. Wolverine Origins was a horrible mess, and I think many people would agree. The Wolverine, the Japanese adventure, was a solid movie with a weird ending, maybe. And then we got Logan, which was almost a perfect film. It was pretty good movie. So a reverse trilogy where it got better and better, and where he almost retired, and now he's coming back for Deadpool, which is working its way towards a trilogy. So we will see where it ends up on any list in the future. But yeah, Logan will never end up on a trilogy top 10 because of the first movie, sadly. Number 5. It should show up at some point. We got Star Wars, old VHSs of the special edition, original, digital remastered trilogy, whatever version you have of Star Wars. And again, some people would place this clearly in top 3. And I am definitely a Star Wars fan. No doubt about it. I like Star Wars, and I grew up with Star Wars. I remember watching Star Wars when I was a wee child. Watched it on TV when it first aired on TV in the 80s. And the original trilogy, if you were a kid, you might have liked the Ewoks. But I am one of those who am not that fond of the Jedi movie compared to the first two. Again, the third. I like it fine. It is an 8 out of 10, where Empire is a 10 out of 10, and New Hope is a 9 out of 10. So 9 out of 10 on average, pretty good. For a trilogy, very good. But the third movie pulls it down a wee bit. It is not as good as the other two. Still very, very good on average. And that brings us to the almost, and I think many people can guess what comes in now. The prequels. The prequels. If you were a child when you watched the prequels, I can understand if you really like the prequels, and the prequels might be even on your top 10 list. Now, it is not on mine. No more comment, I guess. It is more Star Wars. I watched them in the cinema when they came out in '99, as mentioned before. I watched it once. I can't remember how many times I watched it. It's fine. I don't. There's one more almost, and I don't own the discs of the sequels. But I do remember a time when there was still hope for the sequels, when this character was supposed to be cool. Um, didn't live that long, but there are some good ideas in the sequels, and it didn't turn out great, but I'm sure there's some people who really like the sequels as well. But almost, but not really. Number 4, and I really couldn't find any props at all for this, so we will have to rely on graphics. Indiana Jones. This is again one of the things that shaped my childhood. There are a lot of differences which people like which number in the trilogy best. Some people don't like Temple of Doom. Some people prefer the third one over the first one. For a long while I didn't like Temple of. I thought the second one was the worst, the least best, not the worst. They're all pretty solid. That's the wrong word. They're all pretty good, but Doom was the least best. And now I think they're just all pretty good. In hindsight, I still believe the first one is the solid build up, and the third one is the most entertaining, where the second one is the horror middle-ish movie, with the most horror elements, for a child, which I was at the time. For a young person, I can't actually remember how old I was when I watched them. But as a trilogy, very solid, very consistent, very entertaining, good quality, good director, so that makes sense. And that leads us into another series that also overstayed its welcome, which Indiana Jones certainly has at this point. The reviews just came out for the newest Indiana Jones, and it seems they didn't manage to turn that around, sadly. Almost. Terminator. And I have no idea why I own this on DVD. I think it was on sale somewhere. Terminator 1 is a classic. It isn't the best movie ever, but it builds a foundation that number 2 definitely ran away with. Number 2 might be one of the best pure action movies ever made. James Cameron, once again, in most cases, delivers good movies. I don't want to discuss Avatar. Don't want to start that war. And then we got Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. It is the Transformers of the series. It just suddenly is different and not as good. And and then they just kept going. Just like Indiana Jones. It just kept getting worse. Sadly. Number 3. As you might see, you might also guess what number 3 is for me. The Avengers Trilogy. And this might be the most controversial pick on my list. Again, I am a geek. I grew up reading comic books. And for the Avengers Trilogy, for many, the second movie is the biggest hurdle. And there's a cheat, because it isn't really a trilogy, some would say, But I am combining Infinity War and Endgame into the saga it was originally meant to be. It is. I take the Fade to Black as a interval in that case. It is Avengers 1, Age of Ultron, and Infinity Saga as the trilogy in this list. Age of Ultron is slightly weaker. I still think it is a good movie. It is a good comic book movie. And then Avengers 1 is very good. Age of Ultron is slightly weaker. And then you have the Infinity Saga as, for me, one of the best pairs of movies ever made. In my personal opinion. Especially if you have seen everything up to and you like that sort of thing. And I definitely do. The smile on my face when Endgame ended, having seen everything leading up to that, was it's rare. It's rare you get that experience. And that is why Avengers as a trilogy is at number 3. But when we talk about Avengers, we also have an almost. And the almost connected to the Avengers is the X-Men prequel trilogy, starting with First Class. And First Class is a very good start to that trilogy. But then we get, then we get Days of Future Past, which many also like a lot. I don't think it is as good as First Class, but it's still a very good movie. And then we get the third movie, which just doesn't live up to the first two. And we continue to spiral down into flames with Phoenix. But we, of course, don't have to count that in a trilogy count. It's almost a good trilogy, the X-Men prequels, but not anywhere good enough for any list, sadly. They started well, but Apocalypse just ended any chance for that, sadly. Number 2. Again, I don't have a graphic for this, but it is Back to the Future. Once again, my childhood. This was one of the movies I watched the trailer and I really, really wanted to watch the first movie. And when I heard they filmed the second and third movie back to back, and I couldn't wait to watch it in cinemas. In my book, it is still, I watched it a couple of years ago again. It is, you can tell that they had a plan in mind. If you ignore the fact that they changed main actor and there were issues and so forth, they had a plan with the script. You can tell they had a plan, and it is a solid trilogy on the story front, acting, everything. Time travel movie, sci-fi. It almost doesn't get better than this when you are talking trilogies, and that is why it is in number 2. You rarely get consistency as good as this in trilogies, and there is no weak movie. A couple of people don't like the third one as much as the other two. Some people don't like the second one as much as the other two. I like all 3 equally. I find every movie entertaining, and that is why it is number 2. That brings us to the movie connected to this. There is almost no connection, but I just wanted to shove in this movie before we get to the honorable mentions. The Matrix. We got one of the best sci-fi action movies, geek action sci-fi movies, with one of the worst trilogies connected to it. And yeah, not much to say about that. The Matrix is still the movie I have seen the most. I think the current count is 25 times or so. Because people wanted to see it. I had a big screen TV, and people wanted to see it at my house. So I watched it a lot. At some point, I had the movie learned by heart, and the two follow-up movies didn't live up to the first movie. Sadly, that brings us to some honorable mentions, and these I just want to mention because they are people always mention these. They are not really geek movies, but they are really good trilogies. The first, The Godfather, always mentioned in these lists. It's definitely not a geek movie, but it is a solid movie. Again, it has an issue with the third. The Creed trilogy, again, just became a trilogy. Very solid trilogy. We have the Before trilogy, reviewers' darling, drama, very solid movie trilogy. The Three Colors trilogy, blue, white, and red. Again, reviewers' darling. And in my personal favorite, but I wouldn't add it to this list just because it isn't a true trilogy. Just they are just linked because of actors, and that is the Three Flavors Cornetto trilogy. They have a loose connection, but isn't a true trilogy. These I just wanted to mention them because they are often mentioned in these kinds of lists, and that brings us on to number 1. This guy, Lord of the Rings. In my book, there is no better trilogy than this. The achievement they managed to do when they filmed these 3 movies is still not surpassed and will likely not be surpassed anytime soon. Again, I mentioned Avatar. James Cameron might surpass them financially at some point. I don't think he will surpass them critically, and probably not in my heart. As you can see, these are the extended edition. I got a signature from Andy Serkis. And for those who don't know, he's the guy who played this guy in the movies. I grew up. I've said I grew up a couple of times. I grew up reading Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and Silmarillion. They were the first book I read in English, which again put them in a special place for me. And there's just not much to say other than that. They're great movies. And a great achievement. But that also requires me to do the almost, which, to no surprise, is The Hobbit. which didn't need to be 3 movies. And there's a reason why I never opened these 3D Blu-rays. I no longer own a 3D TV. But let's not dwell on the Hobbit and return to the number one spot, The Lord of the Rings. I hope this was interesting to somebody. Again, this was a personal taste list of movie trilogies. If you have any comments, please feel free to comment below. I haven't asked this before, but I would love if you liked and subscribed to help the algorithm, I think people say. Going forward, I'll try to add something different on Fridays, and once in a while I will add a flashback video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.